Okay, here we go. 10 ways to engage people who worship online. Ready? I'm Reverend Jim Keat, Digital Minister at the Riverside Church and Director of Online Innovation at Convergence, and today we're talking about, you just heard it, 10 ways to engage people who worship online. I'm quite excited for this because I think we often overlook or just don't give enough intentional thought to the people who are worshiping online during our Sunday morning broadcast, whatever method you're using. At Riverside, we broadcast to YouTube Live, so we have a whole lot going on there, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that we do to intentionally engage people who worship online. So let's dive in. Number 1, greet them in the chat. Now, this might seem simple, and it is. When they're showing up in the live chat, be there to greet them. Be there to say hello. Essentially, what this means is have a greeter at the door. You do this all the time in our physical spaces, or hopefully you do. But we need to think about it similarly in our digital spaces. And how are you even creating a culture of digital greeters? That's one thing I'm working on at Riverside now. So number 1, greet them in the chat. Be where they are. Be there as they're entering. When you're saying, let us know where you're joining from, and they let you know, you can say, so glad to have you from Texas. Oh, we got people from both coasts, whatever the response might be. But just be there to greet them as a person greeting a person. That engages them in those opening moments of online worship. Yeah. Number 2, give them a bulletin. Give them a thing. I mean, you can't hand them a physical piece of paper, but there's lots of ways you can do this, whether it's making the bulletin available to be downloaded. That's one thing we do at Riverside, trcnyc.org/bulletins. You can always download the bulletin from years past. So make it available so that they have the thing, or put the bulletin stuff on screen. Use ProPresenter, any kind of presentation app, program, platform thing to put hymn lyrics and responsive readings and all the things that would typically be in the, paper bulletin, put it in the online space so that the people worshiping online can still engage with what's happening in worship. Whether they want to sing or they want to reflect on the lyrics of the hymns or participate in the calls to worship. You can only do that if you got the resource. So give them a bulletin. That's number 2. Number 3. Ask them questions. Oh, this one's one of my favorite things we started doing at Riverside last Easter, April-ish 2022. I've been doing it every week ever since. Ask the people in the online space specifically questions. What we do is when worship is beginning, in the opening announcements and welcome time, the person leading it from the room looks into the camera and says, for those of you worshiping with us online, let us know where you're joining us from, and we have this question we'd love to ask you, and leave your response in the chat. So we have a question we craft each week that's connected to the themes of that day or the sermon. And so they get to share their responses, which is really cool to see the conversation that pops up in that moment. And then at the end of the worship service, we loop back and we share what those responses were, which I think is my next one. Is that my next one? Oh yeah, share their responses with the whole group. So you ask them the question. That's one way of engaging with them. That's good. But then getting those questions back into the full experience for everyone is the next necessary step. Share their responses with the whole group. This means in our context, a lot of times it's me. If I'm off, someone else covers it. But you capture those responses in the chat and you text it or Slack message or whatever works to get it to the person doing the closing part. For us, it's whoever's doing the benediction. So just before the benediction, they always say, this morning we had this many people joining us in worship online from these states, and here's what they had to say to this question. So we're bringing the people in the online space centered into the experience, because it's very easy for the online worshiper to feel like they are pushed to the edges, peeping in through the windows to watch church happen. So how do you center them when they so naturally end up being on the edge? So this is one example for us that's really simple, really meaningful to hear from so many people in our space. So yeah, share those responses with the whole group. What's next? Number 5, celebrate their numbers. Oh yeah, this was the other piece connected to that, where we're always at Riverside sharing how many people were worshiping online. I made another video talking about how I developed that process. We do 1.5 times the concurrent live viewers on YouTube. there's a whole reason. Yeah, watch the video. There it is. But celebrate those numbers. You can't just let it be this hidden thing. The in-person people can get a sense of how many people are gathered because they can just look around and generally count. Oh, there's 100-ish of us. But the online is this mystery. Even the online worshipers might not realize how many people are worshiping with them. The people in the room don't know how many people are worshiping online. So we always track it. I keep an eye on it kind of at the sermon-ish range is when it typically plateaus and peaks. And that's part of what's shared at the end of the service so that it can be celebrated. So those, seemingly disembodied congregants are once again made whole and restored as human. Yeah, so there you go. Celebrate their numbers. Number 4, number 5, number 6. Oh, where are we at? Number 6. Read the call and the response. Okay, we're getting into some technical things here, but I think this is the stuff that's too often overlooked. If your church does, calls and responses, responsive readings kinds of a thing, we do a call to worship pretty much every Sunday that starts as a leader congregant response kind of a thing. You got to read the response. The person leading this can't just say, and then go silent while the congregation talks. Because unless you got really good ambient mics, but you are the voice for the online congregant to follow as well. And if you don't say those parts, the people online don't get to hear that portion either. Things like the Lord's Prayer, if you're saying it as a group, it's easy for the person leading it to I'll kind of go quiet so I'm not too loud in the mic. No, you need to still be present because the people online need your voice to direct them and guide them. We're not hearing the group like you do in the room. So yeah, number 6 is to read the call and the response. Little thing, I think a big difference. Number 7. Use language that includes everyone. Oh, this is important because it's so easy for us to just replicate the past rather than reimagine what's needed for the present and the future. By that, I mean we replicate the liturgies of our past or regurgitate the liturgies of our past, I like to think sometimes. And that means the language is often contextual to the people in the physical space. Communion is a good example. What's your communion liturgy? Who are you centering in the instructions for communion? It's not that the people in the room don't need instructions, but so do the people online, and they shouldn't just be an afterthought. How do you craft that intentionally? So a change we've made at Riverside is we start those instructions to the online congregant, and then we move to the in-the-room congregant, and then we end by saying, and now we celebrate communion as one church all together, or something like that. But it's just the intentionality of using language that makes sure everyone is included, not just like the offering, is your offering focused on ushers coming forward, or can you craft the invitation to give in a way that truly invites everybody, regardless of location or even time, meaning, online congregants can watch the worship service long after the thing happened. Yeah. So that's number 7. Use language that includes everyone. Number 8. Invite them to lead. Invite these online worshipers to actually lead. It's not just passive open mouth insert worship service, but it's something that they get to be a cook in the kitchen, stirring the batter and, cracking the eggs and making the thing and participating in the thing. There's lots of different ways this can happen. If you have a Zoom thing going and maybe you have Zoom brought into the sanctuary so you can have the Zoom participants live, cool. At Riverside, we don't go that far because that's just a lot of variables and the internet will fail us and we'll get frustrated. We do other Zoom stuff, more on that later. But what we do pre-recorded portions every week. We try to always have at least one portion of the worship service led by someone who's not in the room. And sometimes that's me. I'm remote. I live in Michigan. The church is in New York. Other times it's congregants who are dispersed across the country, and we're intentional about inviting them to be scripture readers or lead this liturgy and the various portions that we would have, congregants participate in. Let's have someone do it who's not in the physical space. And what that does is it allows the people who are worshiping online to see themselves in that centralized space. And it allows the people who are in the room to realize, once again, there are people worshiping with us who aren't in the same physical space as us. So inviting them to lead, I think, goes a long way in empowering the online congregant, engaging them in a new way, and kind of activating the in-person congregant as well. Okay, number 9. Make eye contact. Yeah. This I talk about all the time because it's probably my biggest pet peeve when this is what you get. I'm preaching to the church today. Hello, church, 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 preach, 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 and never looking here. We were spoiled during moments of churches being closed for in-person worship and online only, because when we were in those moments of online only at Riverside, it was like a year and a half of online only, and then another little round later with Omicron, where we would have this eye contact all the time because the room was just our studio, and the experience was entirely online. So we would always be looking into the camera. And now there are people in the room, so your attention is split. And we're hardwired evolutionary biology to look at the humans, the flesh and blood around us, and we forget to look at the robot, the camera. But that camera represents potentially hundreds of people. At Riverside, we have more people worshiping online than we do in the room. So when the preacher is spending most or all of their time, the worship leader spending their time looking at the people in the room, they are actually ignoring most of the congregation. And even if you don't have a majority of your congregants worshiping online, if is anyone worshiping online, you need to give space to look at them and acknowledge them, which means you, the worship leader, needs to know where that camera is. It needs to be set up in a way that it can be accessed with your eyeballs. It's not a security camera. It's a participant in worship. And it's a reminder for your congregants that if you're not looking directly into the room, but you're looking at the camera, that's okay because you're looking at congregants. And don't just look at the camera when you're talking about the online congregation. That's my pet peeve. It happens at Riverside all the time. Well, not as much anymore. But you look at the camera when you talk about the online congregation or talk to them in that capacity. For those of you worshiping online, we don't just look at the in-person people when we're talking about in-person things, do we? So we need to train ourselves to broaden and diversify our eye contact. That's number 9. And last, but definitely not least, number 10, give them something exclusive. Oh, this one is interesting. I think it's important to give them things that are unique and exclusive to the online experience, because often, chances are, if you are finding ways for online congregants to engage and participate in your weekly worship service, that's a thing that is still largely designed for the in-the-room experience, and you're just making it more accessible and engaging, which is good. That's great. That's a step forward that we all need to do. But can we just give them something unique and exclusive just for the online worshiper and congregant? Can we? I think we can. I think we should. At Riverside, what we do is every Sunday after worship, we have virtual coffee hour. Sometimes we shift that and it's an in the nave, in the sanctuary kind of sermon talk back, but it's typically always on Zoom, probably 90% of the year. After worship, usually around 12:30, the preacher shows up in the roving room. We have a computer set up, and myself or someone else is kind of greeting and hosting the space, and we host the conversation with the preacher for the people who are online. And we don't do it in the physical space, aside from once in a while with a guest who the whole congregation wants to hear. That's another thing. But we make it exclusive and designed primarily for the online worshiper. It's this Zoom experience where you get to then talk with your pastor for a half an hour or so about the sermon she preached. I've had people ask, including our new senior minister, shouldn't we make this available to the people in the room as well? Yeah. But most of the things are designed for people in the room first. This is the one thing we design for the online congregant first. And we find ways to get them in. Sometimes we'll set up a screen someplace so they can eavesdrop and watch the Zoom conversation. We produce it as a podcast so they can listen to it later if they couldn't be there for the live conversation. But we've created it intentionally, that virtual coffee hour privileges the virtual congregation. And we're okay with that. That's an intentional exclusive experience that they get to have. So yeah, there you go. 10 tips, 10 ways to engage your online worshipers. What did I call it? Well, that's interesting. 2 of me. Hi, Jim, twice. There we go. 10 ways to engage people who worship online. What else would you add? What did I miss? What's missing from my list? Here's my list one more time. Boom. Take a screenshot. Quick. Did you get it? Yep. Leave a comment, try them out, let me know how they work, and I'll talk with you again next week.